place. And before we did this interview tonight, you were bringing up John Lennon, and he had that street credibility. Speak to that.
Well, I think it's really interesting. In the rearview mirror now, we know that was it the CIA or the FBI?
Both.
Okay. Well, they had their eyes on him. Why did they have their eyes on John Lennon? Here's a guy saying all you need is love. Because when a person amasses enough individual power outside of a system, they're dangerous. They're dangerous to that system. And that's why I think there's a systemic level of control, whether it's put in at the entry level, the mid-level, or the top levels, or all levels, to kind of try to keep people like that marginalized, you know? And I think now we're going to be seeing the digital form of that marginalization. You know, you call them hit pieces. Well, now there's going to be the digital version of that. You know?
Well, what they do is they create a artificial grassroots movement that wants to help children, and really it's a cover for a giant continent-wide invasion for resources.
In that particular instance, you know, I hope that you're wrong, and I hope that it is about children, and I hope that it is about the humanitarian thing. The problem is we have plenty of history to indicate that that's not always the case.
You're right.
And that's why your ideas about it should be taken into that debate and examined, and not feared because it seems to be counter to a humanitarian idea. If you can look at your concepts in the macro, you're saying if this is what goes on, you know, we'll save more children, we'll help more people if we clean these systems up. If we get caught up in the micro debates, you know, that's why we get into this rigidity in our country, and it gets really dumbed down, and the public discourse goes down to, you're an idiot.
Well, that's what I've learned, is that if they left African countries alone on average and let them use their own resources, Africa would be a jewel. But Western corporate interest know they can just go wreck a country, fund rebels, or fund the neighbor to attack, and then come in and get it for nothing.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Oh, yes.
Is it John Perkins is the author? That's a fantastic guide from somebody who was in that system that talks about how Western corporate interests come in and exploit the people of Africa.
Exactly, and he talks about how they'd have a PR article, you know, in the New York Times, Washington Post, about how the person was a war criminal, even if they weren't, as a way to just depose them. And so, I mean, that's the thing. The globalists follow the same models over and over again.
Well, because they work.
Exactly. So it's like, oh, I've seen this. How do you know a 57 Chevy? You see it over and over again.
Yeah.
And then you see the trendies getting conned by it. You see everybody going through the same motions. And it's just so frustrating to see it happening.
Well, the quote that I always think about, having been in this media system for over 20 years, is it's either Schopenhauer or Kant, but it's something along the lines, and I'm sure I got it wrong, but it's like, first they ignore you, then they try to destroy you, then they try to co-opt you or buy you in, and then they claim you. And I think that's a really good guide for anybody to look at any public figure. I don't care who they are, an actor, a playwright. That system does come into play at some level. And I think that until that system is eradicated, there's a struggle there that taps a key human resource, which is innovation, and sort of puts it through something that is ultimately serving somebody else's interest. And I think that you know, you have books that is it The Fountainhead or the Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand, you know, where she basically talks about that particular blueprint. And I've read interesting information to suggest that she was Illuminati and she was expressing some sort of other deeper blueprint. It's an interesting debate to consider. But as somebody who's thrived on the largest stages in that, somebody who's taken himself off that stage, and somebody who's readdressing it now from a different, more humanistic angle, I can say that it pains me now, at my age now, I'm going to be 45, to watch where young, talented people are put into that meat grinder from the get-go, and they're put into it now at an accelerated rate that's sort of unprecedented, and the technology is in many ways aiding and abetting that system. So it's up to us to be a little bit more cautious, because right now America needs young people to be smart. We need them to be debating. We need them to be protesting for things that really matter, and not getting caught up into quasi-side arguments like wealth distribution. Because that's really not the argument. You know what I mean?
Exactly. The debate should be how to generate wealth, not how are we going to redistribute it. I was reading that at South by Southwest, I guess yesterday or so, you challenged some of the people there about stop trying to be so cool or trendy. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think what happens is, you know, in my particular world, trendiness has now become part of the business model. And you have a lot of websites that exist, let's call it in an independent tier, that have gone into business where creating exclusivity principles, you're not cool enough to listen to this band. We know what's cool. That's become part of the business model. But what it's done is it's hurt the overall creativity of the business, and it's also hurt the ability for a young artist who maybe starts in an independent world because they're gifted. It hurts their ability to transition into the mainstream, and that lack of transition to the mainstream keeps those vital new ideas from entering into the bigger world. And then you have, so essentially you have a widening gulf where you have an invested indie world which really doesn't want their artists to succeed beyond a certain...
Compartmentalized niches.
Thank you. And on the other hand, you have a growing corporate representation of music, which most people find alienating if you're a real music fan.
I can't listen to any of it. I mean, all the new stuff is just, it's bizarre.
It is bizarre the way technology has affected what pop music has become. I'm not saying it's all bad, but it's hard when I came from a world which valued certain systems of integrity to see that eroded basically to separate into two niche interests which really don't serve the overall whole.
Billy, you were telling me last night that more and more you realize that the answer to just pure empty commercialism, to put words in your mouth, is a spiritual understanding. And of course, you're not going to find that in a church or in some box. But I mean, for you, your spiritual walk, your spiritual awakening, I tend to agree with you. I think that's really the answer to this artificial system, is people tuning into the fact that we're in a limitless universe.
Yeah, I find it inspiring sometimes when you talk about how when you're not really sure what to do, you go outside and look at the stars and you become, you know, integrated with the cosmos. You realize your place in it. And I think that's what we all have to do. We can't be so selfish as to not consider others. We can't be so selfish as to not think that what we do in irresponsibility doesn't have an impact on somebody else. You know, there's that, you've seen the commercial or the thing in the movie where the guy knocks over the bottle and somehow it's 14 steps down and, you know, somebody gets hit by a bus or something. There is a continuity in quantum physics to what we do, the power of intention, the laws of attraction. And I think, you know, and it's by no means a criticism, but we discussed it in terms of your program. I think that, kind of like I alluded to before, we all have to start thinking what success looks like. If we don't like the system that's in place, and hopefully we'll be able to engage your democracy to change it, that would be my hope. What does success look like? What does a healthy democratic system look like in 2012? I mean, we're a far away from it, and I bet if you polled 100 people on the street, most people would say our democracy is in need of an update. But it isn't like these jerk-offs writing on there, the Constitution doesn't work anymore. You start to see those articles start popping up. Constitution's outdated. The Constitution's not outdated.
No, we left it is the problem.
Yes. So a return to constitutional values, emphasis on liberty and freedom, not being afraid of innovation and new ideas, rigorous debate. But what does that look like? Let's say we could wave a magic wand and we have the democracy that we can be proud of. What does that look like? In 2012, I think we need to start focusing on that because the power of intention is strong. You know, we have to see what happiness looks like, and we'll know whether to go left and right as we walk down this particular...
I agree with you. That's the biggest part I'm missing, is I'm just trying to get people to wake up and see the attack we're under. But you're right. You've got to have something to sell against that.
Right. And I see interesting things. You know, I see where people are doing co-op farming. People are forming collectives. People are getting together to pray. They're forming their own churches. If they don't trust their own church, they say, well, let's just have our own church. Doesn't matter what denomination.
Exactly, and they're creating their own media. And if you look at it, we were talking in the car today, they're attacking the individual farms and co-ops here in Austin. People buying their own cows, sharing on their own farms. The feds and state are freaking out. All over the country, people are starting home churches, different denominations, different religions. They're shutting them down with zoning.
Isn't some community pass a law where you can't have more than 2 people together to...
Yeah, California and areas of California, Colorado, but I mean, Colorado, but you're right.
You're not allowed to assemble in your own house now. It was some sort of weird law like that, right?
Exactly. The reason I'm gibbering in excitement is You're absolutely right. The system shows us what's powerful by what they freak out by. And they're going after Amish. They're going after home churches. They're going after backyard gardens.
Hey, why do you think there's been a suppression of Native Americans all these years? The Native Americans is one of the richest, most incredibly beautiful cultures ever created on the face of the earth. Whether you're talking about the Maoris or, you know, I mean, the Aboriginals in Australia. I mean, these people in many ways hold the key to our success. And those are values that I really resonate to.
And they're independent. They're not commercial. They're the enemy.
So we need to, as a culture, as a people who care about liberty, care about freedom, care about the future of our country, we need to start setting that intention. And we're never going to go, unless something horrible happens. I mean, you know, the iPad's a part of our life. The cell phone's a part of our life. So what does that mean? How can we use technology in the right ways? How can you be an independent reporter? How can you create your own systems? How can people create their own systems to connect people together? How can you use the systems that are in place, the Facebooks and the Google Pluses? How can you use that to your advantage? If those systems are going to be there, you know what I mean? Instead of just plugging your fingers in your ear, well, how can you use that to your advantage? Of course,
I agree.
You're going to be spied on, but...
But a lot of people say, don't use any of the system. I say, do both. Build an alternative system and come out of the Babylon, but at the same time, go into the Matrix and use its own system against it. You know, do both.
Mm-hmm. Having been inside the music business, I can agree with you on that.
Well, I have to say this. I have seen an exponential awakening because I don't claim to be the best at what I do. I mean, it's the imperfectness, though, that basically fits into the larger whole. I have seen my own personal success reaching tens of millions of people. And there are so many others that are more articulate, who have greater gifts than I, and I'm seeing them come online. And I know that in that true diversity, that's what the corporate board can't stop. They can play whack-a-mole all day long, but they can't stop the signal.
Yeah, and this is what I would say in conclusion. Even if you, Alex Jones, were wrong about everything you ever opined, even if you were wrong, the fact that you were willing to put those ideas to create that debate, that is the key. That's why people shouldn't be so scared of those ideas. And that is the key to our future, I think. It's not about whether or not you're right, I'm wrong. That is a system that's put there in our psychology by people who want to control our individual intuitive systems. Because at the end of the day, look, people can sit here and watch us talk for an hour. If they think we're wrong, great. If it's coming from their own heart. If people sit here and watch us and they say, these guys don't really know what they're talking about, and that's coming from inside them, that's God speaking through them. And maybe we are wrong. That's perfectly fine if it's coming from their own internal system of intuition. If they're buying a corporate narrative that convinces them that we're wrong just because we're opening our mouths and we're questioning something, that should scare them, because that means they're robots. That means they've been controlled by somebody along the way. They're not thinking their own thoughts, they're thinking somebody else. And that's Orwellian, and that should frighten them.
What about this point? I find a lot of people say, you're probably right about this, but what are you going to do about it? I choose to join the system. They think it's like joining the winning team or a bandwagon. When a team's going to the Super Bowl, well, then they buy the jersey or the T-shirt. It's almost like they think they can join with this inhuman, cold system because they've made a decision. I try to explain to them, you may delusionally think you're part of the system because you've joined it, but it's a system that destroys humanity. I mean, the only way to win is to resist this. And that's why I say resistance is victory. It doesn't mean we have all the answers, but we are saying we don't agree with this. And I think out of that debate will come the answers.
Yeah, any system that's devoid of true leadership is troubling. And so when I see that in people where they just accept an idea without actually having their own internal debate. I mean, we've all been in those dinner conversations where you just kind of throw something out in the middle of the table and somebody goes, no. And you go, well, where did you get that from? Well, I was listening to, Oprah or something, you know what I mean? They didn't actually have the thought. They heard somebody else express it, and they go, oh, I agree with them.
And they repeat it, but sometimes it's worse than that. They say, I hear what you're saying,